attempting to reclaim the true story of the first Thanksgiving, next on Campus Roundup. Hello, I'm Dr. Duke, and this is the Campus Roundup at the College Fix. Our top story segment focuses on the true story of Thanksgiving. To talk more about this, we welcome a true student of history and an educator at Christian Heritage Academy, Mr. Aaron Ferguson. Aaron, thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Well, you're a great guy to talk to because not only do you teach this, not only is your school and your teaching steeped in authentic American history, but you actually lead significant tours. You take busloads of kids to Massachusetts and you show them all around colonial areas, right, including the Mayflower area.
We have a senior trip. It's a part of our curriculum here at CHA, and we take our seniors to Plymouth for several days, and then they go down to Boston, and we try to take them to see where our country began. And rather than hear the false narrative that we hear today in the media, today the Pilgrims are vilified. Europeans are kind of lumped into a category where, they are responsible for the destruction of the natives and their land and so forth.
Talk a little bit about the first Thanksgiving. It's Thanksgiving week, and we know that you're going to probably want to scream. Just the other day, I asked my kids, we were talking about something tangentially related. These are college juniors and seniors, and I asked them to tell me, when was it that the Plymouth Rock, when did the Mayflower finally land? When did the first Pilgrims set foot on our shores? And nobody in a class of 32 kids could come anywhere near 1620. Really remarkable. Wow. How ignorant they remain of this. But one of the things they do seem to know is, when we talked a little bit further about it, they have this notion, this sort of revisionist notion of the first Thanksgiving, that somehow it was Europeans exploiting Indians, that there was no mutuality here, that the first Thanksgiving itself was an act of colonialism. And really strong attempts being made in our colleges and our high schools to reinvent that story from a really odd angle. Talk a little bit about when you show kids around Plymouth. What do you tell them about that first Thanksgiving? How do you describe it to your kids?
We're able to go back to, let's go back to Bradford's history of Plymouth Plantation and tell them the true story and hear from the eyewitness accounts. And so the truth of it is the Pilgrims got it right, and to lump them in this category of, Europeans who came and devastated the Indian culture is really not fair to the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims were simply God-fearing, Bible-believing, Christ-honoring, peace-loving people who really treated the natives as equals rather than inferiors. And Squanto lived with them, and they end up forging a friendship with the Indian tribe in that region. And so to lump them into that category is really not fair to the Pilgrims at all.
And with the sources we do have from the English and the colonials, what kinds of relations did they have? Talk about the relationship between Squanto and the Pilgrims.
Yeah, Squanto is actually my favorite part of the whole Pilgrim story, Thanksgiving story. He's an English-speaking Indian, the only really English-speaking Indian on the whole East Coast. And for the Pilgrims to find him and land in his hometown is just unbelievable. We say it's providential. It was Squanto who lived with them, gave them permission to live where his people lived before they were devastated by, disease. It was Squanto who taught them how to farm corn and hunt and fish. And really, he's in large part responsible for the provisions of that first Thanksgiving.
Do we know where Squanto learned his English? Where did he acquire that particular gift? And as you mentioned, the providential nature of him, of all the places that the Pilgrims could have landing in that place where you had perhaps the only English-speaking Native American for miles and miles and miles around.
Yeah, Squanto was taken by traders well before the Pilgrims got there, obviously, and ended up over in England. And some monks had heard about that and took him in and taught him English, found out he was from the New World, and paid for him to go back to be with his people. The problem is when he got back, his people, his entire tribe had been wiped out. And so he was the last surviving member of his tribe. And really had no idea what he was going to do with his life. What purpose did he have? And then lo and behold, these pilgrims land at Cape Cod, his very home place, and they want to live where his people live. They asked his permission, and he consented and lived with them for several years.
Talk a little bit about, for us, the first Thanksgiving. So try to paint as accurately as you can from the historical sources that we actually do have, the primary sources. What would that first Thanksgiving have been like, and what would have been the major personalities?
Yeah, so the first Thanksgiving was, there were more Indians, more natives there than there were pilgrims. We know for about 90 of the natives showed up, Squanto inviting Massasoit and his group, and we know a little over 50 of the pilgrims survived that first winter. And so really it was more of the natives there enjoying Thanksgiving than the pilgrims. But they got along very well. They made a treaty with each other. They respected each other. They had, I think it was 3 days, that first Thanksgiving, where they enjoyed food and fellowship and games. They really enjoyed that. And if it weren't for Squanto, that friendship probably would not have been there.
And if you think of the typical progressive narrative that's being taught to our kids now, whether it's in high school or college, it's that the pilgrims were broken down, they were disheveled, they were starving to death. They had really nothing to offer the Native Americans. They were purely seeking mercy and threw themselves at the leniency and mercy of the Indian tribes. Is that true?
Well, there's no doubt they needed help when they got here. Their situation was, perilous. And they were not without food, but they experienced a great sickness that first year, and half of them passed away. The Indians didn't really come into the scene until the next spring, when Samoset comes onto the scene, and then Squanto, and then later Massasoit. So they really didn't need the Indians to survive, but they needed the Indians to succeed here in the New World, at least in that first year.
After the first Thanksgiving and this wonderful 3-day event where a majority of Native Americans came to celebrate and commune a little bit with these pilgrims, it seems like there were no hitches. Everybody got along really well. And did this cooperation carry over then into the next succeeding months and years?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, they had a peace treaty for decades to come with Massasoit, and a great relationship with him and his tribes.
So when you look at the way kids are being educated today and the sort of narratives, how we are revising history again, we're going back and sort of sanitizing it. We are reassessing blame. We are basically the old maxim that the victors write the spoils, right? The victors get to write the history. We're consciously going back and trying to tell history from the losing side, if you can use that phrase, and to try to demonize a little bit those who seem to have won. But this is not the story for the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims did not seek to overthrow this tribe. It did not turn around and betray them in a few months. They did not steal their land or misappropriate it. That when we're talking about this encounter between the New World and the Old World, we really do have kind of a curious meeting of the minds, a relative respect on both sides. Is that pretty much how the history tells us it happened?
Well, there's no doubt that there's some tragedies that happen from both sides, but the Pilgrims did it right. The Pilgrims were not a part of any of those, savage murders or wiping out a tribe, anything like that.
So when you're sitting down to your own Thanksgiving celebration, and when you take your kids to Massachusetts, the way you teach it in the school, what's the takeaway, do you think, from the great story of the first Thanksgiving? It lingers on in American culture, but it almost feels like with every decade that goes by, Thanksgiving seems to be more about football and turkey than it does any kind of a commemoration of our historical colonial history or of actually thanking God for his bounty.
Right.
So when you teach your kids this aspect of history, where do you like to sort of wrap it up? What's the moral you want them to take from it?
Oh, that's a good question. I feel like everyone can be thankful for something. And I think even non-religious people can agree to that. And so for our nation to take a day to focus on those things for which we're thankful for, I don't see any problem with that. But the real meaning of Thanksgiving is not about the Pilgrims. And we say it's not about the natives, or even turkey or football, or shopping, which everybody loves to do. Really, the true meaning of the original purpose of Thanksgiving was to just recognize what God had done in their lives, He had protected them. He had provided for them. He had preserved their liberty. And you know what? We would do well to do the same. That's really the heart behind Thanksgiving. And I think that's the idea that some people take offense to.
Right, and maybe it mediates that a little bit for the progressives when they recognize that the Native American tribes were devoted to their own gods, and they were grateful to their own gods for bounty long before the colonials had gotten here. And when they got together with the Pilgrims, that they were able to give gratitude and thanks in the same way that the Pilgrims did to their God. And so that's a good takeaway, I think. Aaron Ferguson, thank you so much for your time today, and we certainly appreciate it. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving.
No, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
And that does it for us this week. Be sure to stay up on all the latest news and information from the College Fix by joining us on all of our social media platforms. For the Campus Roundup, I'm Dr. Duke. We'll see you next time, and happy Thanksgiving.